In this video, we're going to set up the MPC One with the Tascam Model 12 and various hardware synthesizers and configure the settings to make them all work. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Tefty. If you've been looking for a setup guide on how to do all that stuff, then this is the video for you. All right, everything's connected. I haven't powered things on just yet, except for the Model D. I routed audio cables from the Novation and the Model D into the Tascam Model 12. In terms of MIDI, I am going to be using the USB connections on the MPC One. So I do have a USB hub. It's just a standard Sabrent, however you pronounce it, USB hub that is powered. Any USB hub that supports the standard for being USB connections and all that should technically work with the MPC One. Unfortunately, that particular Sabrent hub I got from Fry's Electronics. Fry's Electronics is out of business now, and I haven't been able to find that on Amazon to date. But yeah, it's just a standard USB hub. All right, turning on the Model 12 and the MPC One and the Novation. So I have a brand new empty project in the MPC One. So the first step to make everything talk and do connections and all that stuff is we need audio interface support on the MPC One. So if you have MPC 2.10 or higher firmware updated for your actual MPC unit, whether it's the One, Live 2, X, all that, then you will be good to go for this. So in order to do that, you go Shift and then Preferences, and then you go over to Audio Device. Right now it says internal and 32 input and output is checked. It'll probably start without the 32 inputs checked. You want to make sure that's checked in order to support more than just a few inputs. And then the audio device currently is not selected on there. You know what? I forgot to plug in the USB on here. Okay, now it's plugged in. So if you select this, oh, it's not there yet. Maybe we need a cycle power. There we go. Now it's working. You might have a few glitches like that from time to time if, you know, just reselecting it could refresh it. So Tascam Model 12, we're going to select that. Takes a moment, and now we officially have the audio working back and forth between the MPC One and the Model 12. So one thing that I didn't mention that is actually very important with the Model 12 in order for this setup to work is you do have to have the Model 12 set to 44 kilohertz 24-bit because the MPC One operates at 44K 24-bit. It does not change from there, as far as I'm aware, as the hardware unit. So in order for these to be congruent, the Model 12 cannot be at 48 kilohertz. So in order to do that on the Model 12, you basically have to make a new song that is going to be 44K 24 bits. So you go Menu, Song, and then you say New, and then you want to choose 44 24-bit. You hit OK, and you should be good to go. You'll get an error that pops up that says incorrect format for the audio interface. So it does tell you if it can't actually switch to the format that you choose for on your song. So pretty simple and straightforward, but that can be a hiccup for some people. If you do find that, make sure your projects are in 44 kilohertz 24-bit in order for them to talk to your MPC device. So next up, you're going to want to be able to route some audio back and forth. So I'm just going to get some sounds real quick. In fact, I'm going to go to our expansion. Okay, I'm going to load this project. This is a clip session, so we'll be able to route stuff out of the clip. Also, if you're getting good info out of this video, leaving a comment and dropping a like really helps out for the algorithm. So thank you very much. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind is outputs 1 and 2 are going to automatically be routed to tracks 1 and 2 on the Model 12 if you have them connected via the audio interface setup like we just did. Which means that in order to hear this stuff, for instance, this beat right here, you're going to have to make sure that mode is on PC for both of these channels. In fact, anything that you want to hear from the MPC One has to be put into PC mode on these channel strips in order to hear it directly from the MPC One, or even be able to record it to an SD card on the Model 12. So for instance, if I have these set to live, then there's no inputs on it going into 1 and 2, and it's not going to be able to play anything back on channels 1 and 2. But let's see, 7 and 8 is set to PC. So if I open up the routing on here and go to 7.8, there we go, 7.8. I can drop the volume, jack it up, apply compression, like way too much compression. So that could be a pitfall for someone initially hooking this up. Like if you don't set your channel strips to PC in order to hear them coming out of the MPC One, then you're going to be scratching your head for a while. It's like, why am I not getting audio? So one way of routing audio from the MPC One to the Model 12 is specifically taking your programs and instruments that are in the MPC and directly routing the outputs on here. So as you can see, We have submix 1 through 8 and outputs, and then also mono outputs as well when you have the 32 channel mode selected. It does not know how many inputs are available on the Model 12, so you're gonna have to keep that in mind when you're actually working with this. It only goes up to 9 and 10 on here, so it's not cutting out the rest of those outputs on here. And same thing with the mono outputs. Let's say we wanna route something to channel 4. We go out 4, and now this is mono. And obviously the EQ works. And same thing with the effects. Forgot which one it was. I did forget that I was routing this to the sub section right here, the sub monitor, and I have the sub monitor routed to main as well. So you can, you can have a sub left-right output of the Model 12 and also a main output. So back to the routing on the MPC One. Very simple to just choose which outputs you're using, whether it be mono or stereo outs and all that. And obviously, if you want to do a stereo out and you're out of the 7, 8, 9, 10 options, you can just pan 3, 4 left, 3, 4 left to right, and then you have a stereo mix right there. Just make sure your volumes are equal. Same goes for 1, 2, and 5, 6, and all that. The next option is to use submixes to route audio. So this is actually one of my preferred methods. If you have a bunch of drum kits set up, instead of just telling them all to go out a certain stereo output, I think it's better to route them through a submix, so that way you can actually apply some effects directly to it. Maybe you want to do a little compression curve, add some saturation, maybe do a filter sweep, a little delays, reverb type of taste. So in order to do that, you have to tell it that you want to go to a submix initially. So let's say submix 4, because why not? And then in order to access submix 4, which this could be confusing if you're new to MPC, is you need to go to the track mix. So in track mix, you have programs and tells you what programs are available. And then you can go to returns, which is sends, if you want to set up an effects return type of thing. And then submixes right there. So with submix, you could choose this. You could do some effects right there, but you can also set up what the outputs are for the submix. Like so. So now you can even do a mono output if you want for that submix, or a stereo mix output, which that's what I'd probably end up doing. Like if I'm doing drums, do like say 7, 8, submix 4, output 7, 8, which is on here. And then this is already set up. So pretty straightforward, right? As soon as you know where to get access to the submixes or how to control outputs of particular programs, this becomes very simple, very fast. One thing that I did not mention is I have a Arturia keystep little MIDI keyboard setup right here. I like this because the footprint is small. I like to keep my desk relatively modular, so I swap pieces of gear in and out a lot. And this is a nice small footprint for doing some stuff on here, but it's directly routed into the MPC One via a USB connection once again. So what that gives me the option of is controlling things. Let's say so this is just the standard tube synth plugin type of thing. Let's actually change it to something else. Let's use this hype plugin. EDM chords. Okay. So this is a good example of wanting to split this stuff out for when you're performing or doing like a live tracking session. Same type of thing. So track 2, and we're in a plugin, and we can now choose which output. So it's going through 1 and 2 at the moment. Say this is muted. And again, because PC is selected on the mode, it's taking the outputs from 1 and 2 and putting them into channels 1 and 2 on the Model 12. One thing that I think can be confusing for some people thinking about the Model 12 is you have inputs on the back, which is for the channels, but then you can have PC inputs, or outputs, I should say, that get sent to the exact same channel strips. You technically have live inputs and then PC inputs, and then separate to that, its own multi-track, multi-recording setup. So really think of it as like 3 separate options right there that can be intermixed, but only one can be chosen per channel at any given time. So you could choose to hear the live inputs, or you can choose to hear the PC inputs, or you can choose to hear the SD card outputs type of thing. I'm kind of intermixing inputs and outputs, and I apologize if that's confusing you further. But just remember, 3 separate options: inputs into the board, outputs from a PC, or the SD card outputs. Also, they do not save individual settings, as far as I know, anyways. So if I'm wrong on this, correct me in the comments. But I'm pretty sure that each one, like whether or not you're doing live, PC, or multi-track, they take whatever inputs are currently selected on the board. You know, whether or not you're sending, panning, volume, and all that. That does not get saved with the current type of setting. That all has to be all adjusted manually. Okay, back to the plugin. So now that we know how to route stuff, again, it's going out 1, 2. We could easily put it out to 7/8, and then add more reverb. Maybe take out some low end and high end. Compress it. Too much reverb. I think you get the idea on that. Let's go super pluck. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. All right, so output 7/8 at the moment. In fact, let's leave this as output 7/8 because I think we'll use this to do some stuff to make a quick little example. Track 1 again is already using this stuff, which this is also going out to 7/8, so we want to change that. In fact, I think we'll make 5/6 the drums. Which, by the way, if you do use clips, you can also individually route the clips themselves. So we have A01, this pad right here. We can send that out to something completely different, not just the program. So you have the option to send to the program, but then you have the option of all the submixes and all the individual outputs, including mono. In fact, maybe we should just use mono. Let's go output 4 for drums. Take off a little bit of compression so it just has a bit. A little bit of bass. Now I'm actually going to send these outputs to 5/6. So I got drums on these drums on channel 4. And that's because, again, I went to here and I said A1 is going through output 4. But then I'm telling the actual program itself, the clip session, that I want to output the rest of them to 5/6. So we have vocals, bass, which we're probably not going to use the bass because I have the Model D set up as well, but some other stuff as well. And then I can go to track 2 for this this thing. Make my own harmony. So I hope I'm clear on the routings for audio, clips, regular plugins, or programs and all that stuff. You know, again, you could route them to individual outputs, submixes, or programs and have the program choose the outputs and all that. Hopefully that makes sense. Next thing that I want to talk about is MIDI. And it's pretty straightforward for the MIDI setup on this stuff. I have 2 pieces of hardware that are going to be routed through the USB. If you are using the regular 5-pin DIN MIDI connections, it's pretty much the same process. You just choose the MPC output and then you choose the channels that you're working with on there. But I gotta say, using the USB connections is ultra simple and is my preferred go-to method at this point. If a piece of hardware supports the USB option, I'm using that option to send MIDI back and forth. I do want to clarify as well that you cannot send the audio of the synths, the hardware synths that you're hooking up, because that's not how they're set up technically. Like the Model D is an analog synthesizer. It does not have an analog to digital converter set up inside of it to be able to send audio through the USB connection. And even if it did, that means that the MPC One would then have to dedicate its inputs and outputs to the Model D in order to send audio. That's not going to work because you're already using the Model 12. I almost got it messed up right there. The Model 12 is technically the audio interface for the MPC One. So that's a one-to-one solution. You cannot interswap that in the middle of mixes and all that. So the USB options for hardware synthesizers is strictly for the MIDI. And obviously there's some synthesizer options out there that do support audio interfaces. But again, that means you would remove the capability of using the Model 12 as an audio interface with the MPC One, which is not what we want to do for this particular setup. Okay, so it's time to set up some MIDI tracks here. Let's go all the way up to 9. So basically pad 9 is then going to be MIDI. So I have MIDI selected, as you can see right here. Now, in order to tell it that you want to talk to, say, the Model D or the Novation Peak, you have to go MIDI port, you select that. I have a couple options in here. You can see the Arturia key step, which is just a controller. MPC is the main outputs, the MIDI outputs on the back right there. Now obviously Peak is the Novation Peak and Model D is the Model D. So let's go Model D. And I don't remember, I think it's channel 7 that I have set up on here. But basically in order to find it, I always just start playing a note and I go through the MIDI channels until I hear it. There it is. And that is routed out of the back directly into channel 3. There's channel 3 clipping. So it was MIDI channel 7. So again, just so we're on the same page, all I did was select the MIDI port, which is connected via USB on here. So this little thing is going to a hub, which is connected at the back of the MPC One. I'm able to choose that, say yes, and then I went MIDI channel 7. And now it's working, being able to play this keyboard into the MPC One and have a signal. Now you might be saying, well, how do I have it set up so I can use this keyboard? Well, if you go into these settings over here and go to the dash thingy, the mark, whatever, you know, the lines, horizontal lines, you have MIDI input, and this can get you in trouble right here because it defaults to all ports, meaning that if there's MIDI being sent out of the Novation or the Model D or the Model 12, then that will send notes to any of these tracks. So one thing that I like to do just to be safe is to make sure it says Arturia on there at any given time. Or whatever your input is, whatever your keyboard input. That way you minimize weird things that might happen. Like for instance, let's say I have an arpeggiator going on in the Pro 3 or the Summit or something like that. Those notes coming out of there could technically trigger to other instruments if they're armed in here and ready to receive MIDI information. And that would definitely confuse things. I'd be like, where the hell are these notes coming from? So something to keep in mind right there. Now, if you do have this set up correctly and you're still not hearing anything, you might just not have it armed. So this little thing right here, see, it's not listening to the input anymore. Now it's listening, so keep that in mind. So that's how we hooked up the Model D. Great. Now I'm gonna go to track 10. So on track 10, I'm gonna do the same thing. I already set up to key step on there. And instead of using the options over here, you can also just use them right here. So going to peak right there, peak, and then I don't know what the channel is. Same process. Channel 8. Now this is routed into 910 on here. So to recap, channel 3 is our bass that we have going on here. 910 is our Novation Peak. 78 is our little chord synth sound thing from Hype. And channel 4 was our drums from the Tefty Meems sample pack phrases on here. 5.6 is still available for some stuff, and so is 1 and 2. Obviously, if Meems is putting vocals on top of this, she's going to be channel 1, but we can also use samples and route those to like 2, 5, 6. One thing that I forgot to mention though, when it comes to MIDI, and this is very important, one of those weird hiccups that people might run into, is how do you get the clock to sync with particular instruments? Go like this. So you go Shift, Preferences, and then you need to be in MIDI Sync. Now, MIDI Sync gives you options of how the MPC One will talk to these various instruments. For the outputs, if you want something to be able to start and stop and also sync up correctly, then you do need to have sync selected on here. So if I go peak and then have sync on peak, then if I go ARP and start playing, you'll see status USB is now trying to correlate to 99 BPM on here. I have 99 BPM right there, and it's trying, there it is, now it's 99 BPM. You know, MIDI clocks, they're not ultra stable or anything like that, so even on the USB connection of stuff. So assuming your synthesizer is set up correctly, then once you hit sync on here, then it should work perfectly. Just to try things out, I'm gonna unsync that, and I'm gonna hit play, and then you can see that status internal, there is no clock being sent into the Novation Peak. So if I go back to this, and I hit sync, suddenly there is USB clock information being sent. One caveat though, when it comes to MIDI clocking and syncing is I do not believe the Model 12 can sync up its multi-tracker with other MIDI information or MIDI devices. I've tried this a few different ways and I've been unsuccessful, and I've looked online and it seems like other people are also unsuccessful. Maybe that's going to change with the firmware update, or maybe I am just doing something really like specific that's incorrect and you guys have actually achieved this. If you have, I'd love to hear about it. Like, drop a comment below. But as far as I'm aware, you cannot have it set up to where hitting play or stop on here triggers the transport on the Model 12. I mean, technically this is acting like a full-on tape machine, you know, so just imagine tape and having to roll it back and handle punching and all that stuff. So it's definitely unfortunate that you can't like sync things up like that. So if you think about working inside like the framework of measures with the Model 12 like you would in say Ableton Live or like an OP1 device, that's not going to happen with this. You have to treat this more like tape and then capturing the performance that you want and then going from there. So everything is routed. We have audio, we have MIDI working, we have a few instruments selected and they're talking to each other and all that stuff. So let's set up some stuff and then do some sampling and show some sampling workflows or possibilities with using the MPC One and the Model 12. So I'm gonna make this 4 bars. So we have a 4-bar thing to work with. And if you're brand new to the MPC format, each project has a bunch of sequences, and those sequences can have their own BPM. The sequences do share programs with each other, routings, and you know, like if you set up submixes and all that, like the sequences do share that information. So if you want to do a song format or like some sort of intro, part A, part B, outro type of thing, then you basically want to set it up like that. Like if you have 4 bars for an intro, then you'd name that first sequence intro and you set up as 4 bars. And then you'd have a part A, part B, maybe part C, or like a bridge, vamp type of section that you might want to riff off of. All of these will loop indefinitely until you move on to the next sequence. And again, those sequences can control BPM information. They can also control program information as well. So you could switch programs on say the Novation or change programs for whatever devices you're hooked up to. Sequence 1 is going to be 4 bars. Okay, so we got that. So I'm just going to get some chords set up real quick. Okay. I feel like that's a little too loud, so I'm going to drop it. Now it's time for bass. Now we need a patch over here. So we have this RP 16th chord patch type of thing coming out of the peak, and this would be a good example of wanting to track this into the MPC One somehow. So you have a few options when it comes to the MPC. You have the traditional sampler, which is not going to be time synced to anything. It can be freeform type of thing. So like if you're sampling a vinyl record or YouTube or you know whatever source that you don't have control over the start and stop of, like in terms of MIDI, like obviously you can start and stop the source, but in terms of being able to control it to a beat where it starts on the downbeat, then you could sample directly into the sampler. And that's a great way of doing stuff. You also have options of working with the looper. This is one of my preferred methods of working with the MPC One because with the looper, you can control it, you can control the start of the recording to then be synced up with other instruments that you're already controlling via MIDI. So this Novation peak is a perfect example of that. I can start the arpeggio right on the downbeat and I can record up to 16 bars. The limit of this is that you can only record 16 bars. So that's it. They won't let you go higher than that. I would love to see that go up in the future, because sometimes you just want to freeform some stuff that's already synced up to a beat, and having to go in and like make sure you find the downbeat and then chop from there sometimes can just be like, you know, it's a hassle. You jumping through hoops to do something that should just be simple right there. Now you do have a third option as well. It's audio tracks. We'll get to that as well. And full disclosure, I actually don't use audio tracks nearly as often as this method. I prefer this method by and large. So just want to make sure you guys are aware of that. So if you look at this, if we play this, so this is going into 910. So you have inputs right here. Inputs, 910. Look at that. We're automatically getting input levels directly out of 910 on here. Now, here's the thing. If I were to switch this to PC and then I hit inputs on, or start playing again, you still see it, okay? So it's still technically detecting the inputs of 910 on here, even though we're hearing the PC output of 910. That also means that you can monitor the input. So if you hit in on there, it does feel like a little bit of delay, but let's try this. So my preferred method of tracking something into the MPC One to be able to use it. So I'm gonna sweep the filter all the way down. I'm gonna hit record, and then I'm gonna hit play start. So if you like what's been recorded right there, what I do is go export, and then I name this, you know, peak sample, or maybe peak ARP. That's a better one. Peak ARP, okay. And then I say keep. All right, now if you go to sample edit, it should automatically select the most recent sample right there. Now a quick hack into making this sync up really fast is you go trim, then you go regions, and set it to 16 regions. So now, what you have currently set up is 16 bars right there, because you know that it was 16 total possible measures that you could record into. So if you exported the entire sample, even if you didn't use like the last 4 or 8 measures of that, you know for a fact that that's 16 possible measure regions in there, which is great because then you can just mix and match. You get the idea. So now you want to be able to use this in measure format. So I go convert, I hold shift, press convert, new drum program with the slices. So I choose this. Now I usually manually set this up for triggering the options because I don't always want to use the beginning part, and sometimes I just want to have like a specific set. Like I don't want the whole 16 bars. I just want to choose the ones that I want to use on there. So let's go track 5. So I go program, and then peak ARP, I believe is already set up. Yeah. So now I can just go through and sequence this real quick. So something's happening that I actually just warned about earlier in the video that I forgot. When I went to these new tracks and I hit play, I'm getting like some phantom notes right here. Well, so track 910 is not playing the peak anymore, but I'm still playing the peak on track 10. I had done a recording earlier and it had recorded the arpeggio notes from the novation. So once again, you want to make sure that your inputs are specific to what you want. Okay, now let's record this. Now, what we need to do is set up the routing. It's currently going into output 1 and 2. We do not want that. We want to send that to 5, 6. So we're going to say output 5, 6. Great. So in my opinion, I think that's a really fast way to set up measures in there without having to jump through too many hoops. The reason why I like to choose it as specifically 1-bar measures as well is because if you grab the next downbeat of the whole sequence revolution and it triggers a 4-bar loop on there, then it's going to play the entire 4 bars of that instrument, even though the other instruments or programs have stopped playing. So I think the best way to handle it is to just have these measures, and then you can kind of decide if you need to cut something early or not as opposed to having it ring out for 4 bars every single time. It's kind of a hack doing it that way, but like just because you hit stop doesn't mean that the program stops playing the audio. You have to double tap stop in order for that to happen, and that can sound jarring or unnatural. So another option for recording audio is actual audio tracks right here. Now the reason why I don't like using audio tracks as much is because I feel like they're separated from the actual programs. I really like the MPC platform, but when you look at the MIDI sequencing and the programs and the drum pads and how you do samples and even clip sessions and all that, they make sense, and they're in this like, here's how you control MIDI section. And then you have this audio section. These audio tracks are like separated from the two pools. It might just be a thing that I just don't work with them enough, so that's why they feel that way. There might actually be really good integration that I just am unaware of, but it feels like every time I want to go in and mute some stuff from audio tracks, it's like I have to jump into the audio section of pages, or I have to go into the track count and then scroll down here, and this just feels really unnatural to me. Like, I know it tells me all this info, which is great, but even going in here and trying to hit mutes on there, like that feels, it just doesn't feel natural. So if I go track mute on here, in order to get to the audio, there's no easy way to suddenly jump to the audio. Like you have audio tracks, they're separated from programs. It breaks the workflow, in my opinion. So that's why I actually don't really use the audio tracks that often unless I'm forced to. Like I really have to switch over and use audio tracks for some reason. Like if you wanted to do a 64 bar or 128 bar recording of something and you didn't want to use the actual sampler on here with a long time limit, then I think the audio tracks are your only option. Like you'd have to set up audio tracks to be able to record long form versions like a traditional DAW. All right, so let's say you do want to record to some audio tracks and how you actually do that. So let's use the Novation peak as an example again. So that's going to be playing. Let's mute the other peak. So we're in our first audio track and we are going to record the Novation peak doing its thing once again. I went into grid mode on here so we can see the audio actually being recorded, and we're going to hit record. Whoops. Totally forgot. Input. Input needs to be 910. Great. Yeah. Let's do it. So we recorded 4 bars because that's what the sequence length is currently. Again, this is something that I don't think is possible. Correct me if I'm wrong. If it is possible, I don't think you can have like say an 8 bar or 16 bar audio track within a sequence that's only 4 bars or less or whatever. In other words, like it has to be like the sequence length. And then if you want to, like you could do a 32 bar sequence and then have a bunch of 4 bar options of audio tracks in there. But again, that kind of breaks the workflow. I don't typically use audio tracks because I don't feel like it is as fluid with the workflow of the MPC. So I'm going to mute this first track right there. I should mention also, one thing that you can do is record a track like that and then edit it for a program. So if you want to do the same type of thing where I did a looper and then chop those up into the measures to be able to then trigger as a program later on, you could totally do it that way instead. But I really feel like the fast option is literally just shift, looper, you're in here, you hit clear if something's already in there, you just choose your inputs, hit record, and it's good to go. You know, plus you can do 16 bars and not have to worry about the measure or the sequence length. The only problem with this is if you need to record beyond 16 bars and you need it synced up with the actual clock, then you'd have to use an audio track. Oh yeah, and audio tracks are limited. I think it's only 8. Maybe 8 or 10. I should know this as I'm making this video, but I don't. If you're using the MPC software, then different story, you have unlimited tracks. But once again, another reason why I'm just like, I'd rather just use programs and make trigger loops and stuff. So we've gone over 3 separate ways of being able to sample whatever you got already going on. If you have vocals coming into say track 1, it's the exact same format. You know, you could just go into the looper. You can even choose one input, I believe. Yeah, you could say input 1, and then it will just record a it'll record a mono track of whatever that instrument is, whether it's voice, guitar. You know, you could easily plug in acoustic or electric guitars into the setup right here, and they can just be direct DI. You know, you can record an electric bass. Anything that is a DI setup can go directly into the Model 12, and then you can route it into whatever input you're wanting to use. Oh, that just reminded me that okay, so there is another scenario where you might want to use the audio tracks for the MPC. That's if you're recording, say, more than one instrument, multi-tracked, into the MPC One to then separate out into various files. You might want to do it that way. Possibly. Let's say you had an 8-channel analog drum synth and you wanted to capture all those inputs separately, then you would have to go into the audio tracks, set up the sequence length to be the exact sequence size that you want, arm all those audio tracks, and then record it that way. That is another option in case you want to use the audio tracks to be able to capture samples of stuff to then convert into programs. Outside of that though, using the sampler / looper, whether or not you're doing a mono input, say guitar, voice, bass, or various synthesizers and all that, I feel like this is the optimal method, or at least for me, it definitely has been the optimal method. So the last part of this video is going to be about recording the tracks into the Model 12 and then also getting a stereo mix and also using 2 sequences to kind of shape a song back and forth. On our previous video, Meems and I multi-tracked 4 takes of a song to the Model 12, and then we chose take number 4 because it was the best one, and then imported those files into Ableton and then did a hybrid mix. So that is one approach that you can do with this. If you want to check that out, I'll put a card somewhere that you can click on. So took a break, got some dinner, came back, and then kind of shaped this beat into something else. Something better for this video that I'm trying to convey here. So I have a part A and a part B right there. So part A, part B. Part A sounds like this. So I have various control over the sounds right here. Like I've got that vocal sample from Meems, which is on our expansion pack right here. I have some reverb coming on the board too as well. Take the reverb off. There's some reverb in the MPC, but kind of gives us some control and texture right there. I got the Model D obviously on channel 3. Then I got the peak on channel 9 and 10. Ended up changing up the drums, so we got chopped drums now. And then I changed up the hype synth as well. That's on 7/8, so I can kind of ride that and put the chopped arps in there. So here's what part B sounds like. Kind of like a breakdown. So we're going to record a version, and then I'll show the ability to export it, essentially, as a stereo mix. So a couple things. The Model 12 will not remember EQ, panning, volume, writing, stuff like that in the middle of a recording. So what it records is the input, and I believe anything post compressor, or you can set it to be recording post compressor. But then EQs, sends, and volume levels on the faders are all happening to whatever is selected, whether it be the live input, the PC input, or the multi-track. So it's something to remember on there. When you do record though, you do get a stereo mix that happens of whatever is playing back upon recording. So that does capture everything that's happening to the 2 bus because it's actually capturing a main mix of that stuff happening. Hopefully that makes sense. We should just record. So I'm not using track 1 and 2. I'm using 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10. So all those are going to get recorded. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, so we are officially recording on the Model 12. And how do I want to start this beat? I think we'll go, you know, I'm going to start with part B. Let's go for it. Now going to part A. of strange ending on there. I would definitely take my time and do more attempts at that, but this is literally my first attempt at trying to do a track at that. So we have this recorded. I'm gonna hit stop on there. It was 2 minutes, 18 seconds. So now if we were to hit play, you wouldn't hear anything because none of these are set to the multi-track. But if we set them to, let's take off the recording first, like so. So if we set them to multi-track and hit stop on here so it rolls back and then hit play, give it a moment so it catches up, you will hear the raw files. Again, it doesn't record the fader movement or reverb or anything like that. It just records whatever input was happening, whether it be the live or the PC input on there. So if I wanted, I could literally try to recreate that mix and do it better than what I did before, which is interesting, right? If I wanted to do that, I would just hit record again and then hit playback, and then it would, yeah, I believe it would do a new mix or record a new stereo mix. Now, what I want to do is take what I had actually just recorded right there. So in order to do that, you have to go menu, then you go to stereo mix export and say, are you sure? Yes, please. And then I already have one in there that I tried earlier, so it's going to say, do you want to override it? And I'm going to say yes, because this is obviously a better one, or an actual attempt. It's also going to have that 27-second silence in the beginning. But so now if I go over to SD card play, there should be a 2-bus mix right there. If I hit play, I'm going to shuttle forward. So that gives you an insight into how you can multi-track and then also take whatever stereo mix that you've gotten off of the Model 12 and be able to then take that off the SD card and, you know, put it into some sort of mastering program or send it to a mastering engineer or whatever, you know, whatever you might want to do with your final mix downs on there. I know a lot of you guys will probably say, well, why don't you just do that with a DAW? And to be honest, you're not wrong. Like, you absolutely can do all this stuff with the DAW. The difference is you have dedicated modules set up specifically for the recording and tracking. Computers tend to be finicky and sometimes they fail. Hardware fails too, so I'm not saying it's perfect. So from a performance perspective, these tend to be more reliable in general. The other side of it as well is you are performing a mix. DAWs tend to be more clinical by nature because everything is set up to be exactly as it is. You know, it's like painting on a completely pure white canvas. You know, it's exact how it is. Even with automation, you know, you can write automation on there, but it's going to be clinical. You have to put in a lot of effort to make things feel like they're shifting and moving in a DAW. And again, I'm not saying you can't do that. You absolutely can do that, 100%. A lot of people do amazing in the box mixes. But what I'm saying with this setup is it tends to lend itself to more of an organic feel, even though this mixer is digital, because you have so much of a hands-on approach with stuff. You know, I'm touching settings, like I was only adjusting filter cutoffs for the Peak and the Model D, and even those alone give quite a bit of movement and momentum to the sound of the performance that comes through on the Model 12. And then I was giving slight volume adjustments live and like even reverb adjustments to that vocal sample live in the mix to kind of give like an organic ebb and flow to the track. And I just want to reiterate, I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm saying that both give different results ultimately in the end. Also, another note on multi-tracking as well, because I know some people have asked, well, do I still multi-track into Ableton? And it really depends on the project. We still have a Mackie mixer off to the side, and all the inputs on it have direct outs, and those direct outs can then double as inputs into the computer if we needed. You know, those are options that we still have. The thing about the Model 12 or this type of like desk setup to recording is that you can easily pack this up and bring it somewhere. You go into a different studio, or you go into a live setting, or you're just traveling and you want some sort of dedicated mixer, multi-tracking type of setup. I think that's where the real power is in these type of things. You have so much multi-tracking options built into one piece of gear. I think ultimately approaching a one-size-fits-all, you know, approach to music production is going to get you in trouble at some point down the road. So my perspective is to be open to different possibilities of getting different results. You know, there's a reason why people like to change locations when they do records. It's perspective changing, you know? So that's all I'm saying. Have an open perspective on approaching music productions, and you never know. Above all though, enjoy the process. Music making is fun. That's why Memes and I like sharing this stuff on YouTube, because it's just fun for us. We love the production process. We love writing, we love producing, and we just like the process of making music, and sharing different avenues and ways to do stuff is really cool. With that being said, hopefully this video has been helpful in some way. Definitely became a lot longer of a video than I anticipated, but it was probably needed for the type of content that I want to get through in here. Definitely drop a comment and like the video if you did get some helpful information out of it. It definitely helps with the algorithm. Obviously subscribing helps as well, and ringing the bell. And if you want to support us further, you can always pick up our expansion pack, Phrases Volume 1, which is on our website, teftymeems.com. We're also looking forward to making new expansion packs as well. But yeah, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time for another one. Deuces.